everybody. I'm here. You want to do the intro?
No, it's okay. If you want to do it, then go ahead.
All righty. Hello, everybody. We're doing a debate today with Mr. Callahan from Callahan Corner about sexism in elections and the 2024 election overall. The moderator for today will be Nate from Nate Talks to You. Thanks to both of you for joining me.
Thank you. Good to
Thank
be
you
here.
for having me.
All right, so I think for the sake of the conversation, I'll let Nate start us off with how we've agreed to format this. Darby, if you want to, I'll let you go first, since I think you're the one who did the response video to start us off. I think that's appropriate.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, so the format of it is going to be that we're going to have 1 minute opening statements, and then when that's taken care of, we'll jump into the questions. So I have 10 questions set up for each of you, and you'll each have 2 minutes to respond to them. And then after that's taken care of, then you'll each have 30 seconds each to reply back and forth to each other. And then the conclusion will be 1 minute closing statements, and then that'll be the end of it. So to start off with, Darby, go ahead and give your opening statement.
Okay, so after the 2024 election, Connor had posted on the Progressive American YouTube page that Kamala Harris may have lost the election, or this was prior to the election, so may lose the election to sexism and racism in American politics. And he brought on a professor from his master's program. And I think it was very unfair to the American people, the American populace that would be going to the polls later the next month, because I think there's a lot of issues that people are scared about under the Democratic rule and under the at the time the Biden administration. With that, I'll yield.
All right, and Connor, your turn.
Alrighty, so there's a couple of issues, and I think some of this was addressed in my response video. The first thing I would like to note is the interview itself with Dr. Isabel Skinner. I know I addressed this in my response. Took place in October, so there wasn't an argument so much as it relates to whether or not Kamala Harris would lose because of sexism, but rather using the conversation surrounding Kamala Harris as being part of a larger conversation about how sexism influences how women run for public office, specifically as it relates to descriptive representation and how they're perceived by the electorate. But nowhere in the interview did I ever insinuate or argue that Biden would have won if he had run, or any other male candidate for that matter. And in fact, in my response video, I noted that the studies that I have looked over in my research for my comprehensive exam and in my master's program show that women win at similar rates to men. What is the issue is how much effort women have to put in to get to that point in elections. And as Dr. Skinner noted throughout that interview, elections are multifaceted as they are
Okay, Connor, your
complicated.
time is up.
Okay, no problem.
All right, so with that being said, obviously a lot of this conversation revolves around racism and sexism. So my first question is for Darby, and then Connor, you can respond after. Did Trump's campaign use sexist or racist attacks against Kamala Harris's campaign?
I would say yes, indeed. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think that Donald Trump could lower that rhetoric down a little bit. And I think that is one of the main reasons that I think that there was a plurality of the vote and not a strict 51 to 49%. And I think that Connor would agree in his response to me. But I think as far as that leading to the loss, I don't believe it did. I think there was a lot of policies that go above and beyond the racist and sexist comments that Trump had made. And in fact, I've only ever voted for the man once. I voted for him in 2020. And then when the fall of the January 6th, I cast my vote for a third party. For the sake of this response or this debate, I won't say who. But I think that it goes beyond the fact that I do not believe that sexism or racism played a role in the policies that Trump won off of. Thank you.
All right, Connor, your turn.
So I'm glad that we can agree that there was a sexist commentary from Donald Trump. I guess my question is, why do you think he makes those comments if it has no effect?
Is that a question to me or
yes, to you.
Okay. Is it 30 seconds for this response?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's unfair to blame the entire election on the words of one candidate. I think there's a lot of people that he's playing into that base. And it's unfortunate that the base that Donald Trump is playing into, the blue collar, I think I'm saying it right, the people in construction type jobs and not necessarily 9 to 5, right? They get pissed off really easily, and I think that he's playing into that, like, even though he claims to be religious, I think he's playing into that kind of non-religious, non-sectarian style of living, and that I think that plays a role in why he uses that rhetoric. There's a lot of people were pissed off about the policies under the Democratic rule before his first term and now before his second term, and so I think that plays a lot of role into he's just riling it up the base, not necessarily.
All right, Darby, your time is up.
Okay, so I just when I look at this, I just kind of have to say, like, yes, I understand why, like, reducing it solely to racism and solely to sexism would absolutely be unacceptable. I think that's an oversimplistic analysis. The problem I have when you, in your response video, and really the discussions we're having right now, is it's not so much that it was the sole reason, but he was saying it for a reason. And even you yourself said he was riling up his base. And people, when they're riled up, they vote. So that kind of appeal is, to me, indicative of it playing a factor, especially when in the 3 key states that Harris needed to win to win the election, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, she only lost by under 2 points in each of those states. And so again, like, this is where it's like the smallest shift can change the outcome. Obviously, there are other issues like incumbency aversion, cost of living. The price. The common phrase was, "What is she going to do about the price of eggs?" Those kinds of things absolutely played a role, and just how much time she had to run a campaign. She only had about 5 months. But that doesn't change that other factors, such as sexism, such as the rhetoric Donald Trump was playing to motivate his base, can and do play a role. He wouldn't be saying this if it. Yep. All righty.
Did you want to go any further with this conversation or move on to the next question?
Oh, we can move on to the next question. I think this is kind of.
All
is that
right.
okay, Darby?
Yep. Okay.
So you both acknowledge that Trump's campaign did use racist and sexist attacks. So with that in mind, how big of a role do you think that played in the ultimate election outcome?
Who's this directed to?
You can begin, Connor.
Okay, so yeah, I think it's kind of hard to perfectly say 1-to-1 that this is how one way is going to go or one way it's going to be. But I will say, when it comes to how, generally speaking, women are perceived in politics, in the absence of information, numerous studies have shown that women are more likely to be stereotyped in the absence of policy-based information. And going back to what I said earlier, the fact that that Kamala Harris only had 5 months to really define herself meant that stereotyping probably played a significant role, because most people didn't know a lot about her. And that failure to define herself, combined with the role of sexist attacks, probably wouldn't hurt her.
All right.
Now,
your time is up.
Okay, so to just kind of respond to the notion of the 5-month candidacy for Kamala Harris, and the fact that we both acknowledge that sexism and racism were definitely on the campaign trail and were used by Donald Trump. I think it just goes to show you who the Democratic Party is as a whole today. The fact that they've only given their candidate 5 months to campaign with not a single vote in the primary system. If they wanted another candidate, they should have done it earlier. They should have asked Joe Biden that he should have stepped down earlier. I blame the Democratic Party.
So yeah, I agree 100% that Joe Biden should not have stayed in the race. His promise initially, I thought he would play on the incumbency advantage, and I admit I was wrong about that. The problem I have is that when we're talking about the role of like Kamala Harris losing the election, the 5-month thing plays a role because people don't know a lot about her, and then that means she gets stereotyped along identity lines. There was a 2002 study that found that when voters rely on gender stereotypes, they use it and affect their understanding of their competence and their policy effectiveness. And even when they don't do that, they look at it from a perspective of their rhetoric. So again, like, this conversation isn't simply a matter of of just the party. It's a matter of how voters perceive the candidate in the absence of good information.
All right, your time is up. Darby?
So I guess my follow-up question to that was, where do you get good information? We have two party systems that use the mainstream media, and both parties feel that the other party has the media in their bag.
So yeah, I think 100% there is a problem with the media. I would also think that like the candidates themselves are responsible for being out there more effectively. And to your point, if Joe Biden had dropped out sooner or hadn't run in the first place, I think she would have been able to get that information out more quickly and effectively in publicly available speeches, live streams, and those sort of things. But also in publicly available media like NPR, which actually protects local media, you get more direct connections with voters. But it's also heavily problematic just with the gutting of newspapers and the consolidation of media. So that's a very difficult situation to fully solve that problem.
All right, and on to Darby.
I got nothing to add to that question.
All right, I guess we can move on to the next one. So for number 3, this is one that you can begin by answering, Darby. So you mentioned Kamala Harris's abortion stance in your response video to Connor. So do you think that Kamala's abortion stance played a major role in her loss of the election? Why or why not?
I absolutely do. In my work as an advocate for the preborn and for the mothers who are endangered of having an abortion and the ones that are seeking that help from the pro-life movement that I hold dear to my heart, I think her rhetoric of no limits on abortion, federal protections of abortion, I think it did play a role in the her loss in November. I think when you look at a majority of Americans, they even across both sides, Democrats and Republicans, both parties want some sort of limitations. And whether that be I think both parties kind of disagree on where that limitations should be, whether it be up until the third term starts or even after the first term. I think most Americans, I would say it's somewhere in that second term of the pregnancy.
All right, but your time is up.
So I guess the biggest question for me, and this is something that I brought up in my response, is if abortion was such a hindrance to Kamala Harris's campaign, why did 6 out of the 10 ballot initiatives on the state level, on those states that Trump won, why did those abortion ballot initiatives win? I mean, this is where I really have a problem. 6 out of 10 of the ballot initiatives that would have expanded or protected abortion won. So if anything, it was a boon to her that she didn't wield enough to win the election.
Your time is up.
Yeah.
So I think you have to look at each individual state who's putting out the initiative and how are they using that initiative in the media? How are they swaying that initiative? If you look at a majority of those initiatives, there was a lot of fear mongering, a lot of you need to vote for this or you're taking away a woman's right. And that's just not true. There's no right in the U.S. Constitution. I can't speak for majority of the states, but there is no U.S. Constitution amendment that says that women have a right to an abortion.
Darby, isn't this kind of tangential though? You're talking about whether or not something is legal, but the conversation is about like how much of an effect did it have on the election outcome?
I yield. I think that it has to do with how it was portrayed in the media.
I see. Do you have any response, Connor?
I mean, I think it's easy to say the media, but if the media is talking about an issue and people are concerned about it, and there's a candidate that is drawing attention to that issue, even if it's in a way that Darby doesn't approve of, that doesn't change that. That means that issue actually works in favor of that candidate, not against it. And the outcome speaks for itself. I mean, in Arizona, which Trump won by 3.1%, the ballot initiative to expand and protect abortion won by 61.6%. So again, like it's one thing to say the media is responsible. It doesn't change that his argument that abortion hurt her holds no sway with the data.
All right, your time is up.
So then my response to the whole initiative situation would be the state, I believe it was Nebraska, correct me if I'm wrong, had 2 competing amendments. And the pro-life amendment ended up getting more yes votes than the pro-choice amendment. So I guess my response question to you, Connor, would be if states would put two competing constitution amendments to the vote of the people and just do like Nebraska did, most yes votes, don't you think that would speak more volume than a single amendment that could be swayed by the media?
I mean, first of all, no ballot initiative is going to be entirely without the media's influence. I mean, mass communication is a thing. But to your point, sure, if you could get enough voters to support putting that up for a ballot initiative or competing ballot initiatives behind it, by all means. But I think at that point, you're running into a hypothetical that we don't have any data to work with and can't really be applied to the 2024 election. What we have right now is what actually happened. When we deal with history or political science, we don't just deal with what could have happened. We have to deal with what is. And what happened
your time
was.
is up.
So, okay, so I understand that the states ballots initiatives primarily favored the pro-choice side of the aisle in the 2024 elections, and that is something that the pro-life movement that I'm very heavily involved in definitely understands and definitely takes concerns with. But I definitely think it's more of a messaging battle. And so I think we need to really fight that and look at what do the people actually want and try to find that middle ground. Because I think, Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a majority of Americans would not want abortion up until birth. I think there's a very small majority or small minority that do.
All right. So I think I've kind of think I made my point on this point. So.
All right. So moving away from the abortion topic, I remember that Darby, in your video, you talked about Kamala Harris letting people out of jail before their sentence was finally up. So I'm going to begin with Connor by asking, between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, who do you think has a better record of following the rule of law?
I think. Well, I mean, this is kind of hindsight is 2020 because in this case, I could use the point of the January 6th things, but that didn't occur during the 2024 election. I will say, though, he did publicly state repeatedly that he was going to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. He was constantly floating it. So I don't think when it comes to the rule of law, Donald Trump is a particularly good person, especially as it relates to protecting the effective establishment of government. But to the larger point, I think the bigger problem wasn't so much crime as it was the inflation and the cost of living, and by extension, the reversal of the incumbency advantage.
All right, your time is up. But so between Trump or Kamala, who do you think did a better job of following the rule of law, though?
Kamala Harris. I definitely think Kamala Harris didn't actively try to float pardoning insurrectionists and then followed through. She never faced anywhere near the level of investigation that Trump did.
So Darby, then to you, who do you think did a better job of following the rule of law so far, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
I would say it depends on who you ask. I think, me personally, I do believe that Donald Trump has been in the ringer. I think for the last 4 years and now going on 8 years and potentially 12 by the time he's done in office. I think that the Democrats have tried to tell you that Donald Trump is this con man. And up until January 6th, I do not believe that he has he had no criminal record, right? And I think the New York case is a scam, and I have facts to back that up, and I will continue to back that up. And I mean, if he gets arrested and charged with something with January 6th, I understand that, but I don't think
your time is up.
Thank you,
Connor.
So here's the biggest issue for me. I think when it comes to cases that were the stronger cases, Trump didn't actively go to trial for them. He constantly pushed to delay them. And if people want to disregard the New York case, fine. Why is it that when it comes to the other 3 cases, including cases related to January 6th and the attempted overthrow of the election, do we turn a blind eye and pretend like it's a Democratic scam when he never even got to see a jury of his peers because of his own actions and his appeals and his refusal to accept the rule of law? Why don't we talk about that?
I would answer with the fact that I can't speak for the judges. The judges can overrule his the defense and can say, no, we're going to trial. Get ready.
All right.
Any more you want to add to that, or should we move on?
I think it's a bit naive a little bit because Donald Trump is perpetually litigious. He has consistently and repeatedly said either if the judge doesn't do what he likes, he says they're illegitimate. If the judge doesn't go along with certain requests, he gets mad about it. He never actually has let himself be held accountable by the judiciary, and they're only really good when they go along with what he says, especially considering he appointed many of the people who are currently on the judiciary and the Supreme Court. So I mean, like this idea that it's just the judges being neutral here. There's more to this.
All right.
But don't you think by continuing to agree with the defense and delaying that trial, that the judge is giving Trump the reason to say that?
I think to say what specific thing? I said a lot in there.
I mean, you say that it's more on the defense, the fact that the trials kept getting delayed so that, if he got elected, which he did in hindsight, right, that he would be able to not have to face those charges. But the judges could have said the defense's motion is not granted. I decline to, or I reject the motion, and we're going to move on to trial starting next week.
I mean, they kept trying to do that, but he kept pushing it up higher and higher into the court system. Like, he appealed. That's the other thing. He kept appealing these rulings, and to the point where they ended up going to the Supreme Court with that disastrous ruling where they basically argued that the president has immunity that is not enumerated in the Constitution. So again, like, or even implied for that matter. When it comes to executive privilege, a lot of that is directly related to the president's ability to perform their duties. So the Supreme Court's decision to give him wide latitude in the Jack Smith case is to me a sign that really we had a lot of the judiciary that was heavily influenced by Trump's influence from his previous administration, and also just when he wasn't, he didn't like it and he opposed it. So,
all right, Connor, your time is up.
I got nothing for the rest of this question.
All right, moving on. I know that at one point in your video, Darby, you touched upon the Israel-Palestine conflict. So I'm curious, starting with you, Darby, between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, who do you think is more likely to effectively enforce a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine?
Do I get 2 minutes or one? I'm a little concerned. I'm confused on the time frame.
We can modify the policy where, like, for each question at the very beginning, you can start with 2 minutes, and then we'll go to 30 after that. So yeah, you have 2 minutes now.
Okay, I thought it was 2 minutes. For some reason, I was thinking we were doing less than that, but okay. So the way I would answer that is I think Israel is more understanding of listening to a Trump negotiated two-state solution, and that's only because of what we heard in the campaign trail and what we're seeing amongst the protesters of the Democratic Party mostly. There's a few third-party and Republicans that may be siding with the Palestinian Hamas side of the war, but I think that when you actually look at the whole situation of Israel and Palestine, I think that a two-state solution would be better off under a Trump presidency and a Trump-led negotiation rather than a Harris negotiated.
So I just, first of all, I've never, as far as I'm aware, Trump has never said that he would engage in a two-state solution. And in fact, he has publicly stated that he wants to remove the Palestinians from Gaza, which has roughly 2 million people living there. So I'm not entirely sure how a two-state solution is going to work when the people are gone from the land that a two-state solution would involve. But to your point, Darby, why is it that when we talk about Trump and his relationship with Israel, it's framed as being more willing to listen rather than letting Netanyahu, who also is facing charges by his own judiciary, do whatever he wants?
All right, Darby.
Well, I think we keep wrapping around blaming, and I think it's unfair to the people of Israel and to the Netanyahu, and maybe he's facing political backlash for it. I get that they're in a time of war, but you have to remember who started this war. It was started by the Hamas terrorist group that is funded by the various governments, various Middle Eastern governments, and I think that Israel has every right to defend themselves.
So I'm not going to go out here and defend what Hamas did. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They committed war crimes. There's just no defense for what happened on October 7th. Darby and I are going to agree when it comes to what happened. There are some people on the left that downplay what happened, or they downright deny that sexual violence occurred. That's not going to happen on my end. But it's worth noting that the people of Gaza haven't had an election to remove Hamas since 2006. And even then, they did not win a majority of the vote. They won a plurality and have actively used violence to suppress the Palestinian people. So we need to be able to distinguish between the terrorist group that controls Gaza and the Palestinians who are stuck there and are being subjected to extensive bombing by Israel.
Time is up.
Okay, so then how would you respond to the fact that there has been a two-state solution proposed by the Israeli people, and it's continue to be denied by the Palestinians?
I would say it was a mistake, a foolish decision. For the longest time, there was a lot of belief that Israel just simply wasn't a legitimate state. The unfortunate reality for the people on that side of the argument is that Israel has been around for over 70 years. It's got about 90 million people living there. I think it was a plurality of them are Mizrahi, meaning Arab Jews who fled from the nearby Arab countries. But to your point, what matters right now is what the Israeli government says now. Netanyahu has publicly stated over and over and over again he is against a two-state solution, and Trump has not called him on that.
Your time is up.
I think it's one of those things that's been tried for so long. They've been given 5 different chances throughout history, and they continue to deny. So why would Netanyahu even give him another chance?
Because if he wants a long-term peace where he doesn't have millions of people who are stateless, he needs to be actually able to give them a means to govern themselves. Yes, I have no interest in seeing the government, the Hamas in charge of the government. Absolutely not. I'm not one of these tankies who come out here and pretend like that's an acceptable outcome. But having some sort of government where there is access to good services, good clean water, things that people in Gaza and in the West Bank have been denied because of their stateless station. Addressing that deals a lot more with radicalism than just continuously bombing the region or invading Syria.
Your time is up.
So if there were to be a two-state solution, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Palestinian Gaza area is right in the middle of Israel. So it would be a nation within a nation, much like we've seen in China and other parts of the world throughout history. How do you feel like a two-state solution in that regard, other than dividing it into 2 separate entities with defined borders, not a country within a country? How do you feel like that would actually be beneficial, or even get along, even be sufficient long term?
So there's 2 things. The first thing is if we just kick all of them out into Gaza, that's ethnic cleansing. That's a crime against humanity. And that's just going to create more radicalism and more terrorist attacks. So that, number one, we do have to respect the fact that the people have been living there for a very long time. But the other side of it is, if we want to effectively establish borders, we're going to probably have to renegotiate the borders because in order to guarantee water access. Part of the problem right now with the Israel Gaza borders and really the West Bank as well is access to water. So we are going to have to renegotiate the borders, but that starts with a ceasefire.
Okay, I'll yield back. Thank you.
Okay, so aside from the Israel-Palestine conflict, probably the second most visible conflict happening in the world right now will be between Russia and Ukraine. So starting with you, Connor, between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, who do you think is more likely to enforce peace between Russia and Ukraine?
Oh, that's easy. I went on a 10-minute rant yesterday about this, and I published it this morning. It's Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris and the Biden administration were dedicated to protecting the Ukrainian people from the Russian threat. The Trump administration basically inserted an imperialist rare earth minerals deal to Ukrainians to basically give them access to rare earth minerals in exchange. That has meant that basically Ukraine had to pony up. The other side of this is Trump refuses to acknowledge that. He's completely at war with reality. He is completely at odds with the international relations that show that Putin is a war criminal, period.
All right, Darby, the floor is yours now.
Okay, so yeah,
Are you
you're
guys still
still
there?
there. You were cutting out a little bit in your answer, so I probably
Crap.
missed about 10 to 20 seconds of that. But I'll just say I think that there's a lot to be said about what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And from what I've gathered with that negotiating tactic, it went horribly wrong with Zelensky in the White House. So I will agree in some regards to what Connor was saying with regards to Putin being a war criminal. But at the same time, I don't think we need. I think we need to be stop making this one size fits all type of thing. We've been allies with Ukraine throughout this war. Now Trump comes in and wants to negotiate a settlement to end the war. It means talking to both sides, Russia and Ukraine, and I think that's something that that Kamala Harris and Biden really missed the boat on. I think they really gave all their resources to Ukraine instead of trying to negotiate a end of the war.
Okay, so could you guys hear me or did I disconnect?
I can hear you right now.
Okay, so that's weird. I'm not sure what the heck happened there. So to Darby's point, I only caught a bit of it because of some technical difficulties, which is fine. The issue I think what Zelensky was trying to make a point about is that it isn't the first time that they have actually negotiated with Russia to have a right to exist. In 1994, the Ukrainians signed the Budapest Memorandum in exchanging their nuclear materials, which they had left over from being part of the Soviet Union, in exchange for Russia respecting their borders, including the Crimean territories that Russia occupies right now. They violated that in 2014, and then Ukraine again went to negotiate another treaty with Russia, the Minsk Accords, and Russia violated that again. They lied, saying they weren't going to invade Ukraine in 2022. They invaded it again with the help of Belarus and North Korean troops. So again, like, yes, we should be seeking peace, but not without security
your time
guarantees
is
to
up.
prevent this.
Okay, I got no follow up.
All right. So question for you, Darby. Now that Trump is officially in office again, what do you predict the next 4 years of his presidency will look like?
So I suspect that there will be some sort of border security deal. I'm not sure what that's going to look like yet. I think it's too early because for some reason there's more than just two factions in Congress. I think we have the far left progressive AOC type style of Democrat. Then we have the moderate Democrat, kind of the Joe Manchin style. And then we have the far right MAGA party that I don't necessarily identify with, and then we have the moderates, and then so there's really that 4 to 5 different styles of what they see as a policy agenda. And I think right now, when you look at what the immigration crisis at the border, I think that's number one. I think the second thing that will happen was states will be given more rights. One being the Department of Education. I think that will be. I don't think there will be a federal Department of Education by the end of. I'll go ahead and say in 2 years from now, because we only have 2 years to get it done. I don't think that the Republicans will be able to keep both the House and Senate. I'm hopeful that they will, but unless they get a deal that works, I don't think that. I think one party will take one over, even if by a small majority. And then I also think that there will be some sort of peaceful negotiations in both of the wars mentioned above. So those are the top three priorities that I think Donald Trump has on his desk right now.
Yeah, I'm obviously not going to be anywhere near as optimistic. For one, the Department of Education handles individual education plans for disabled students. Getting rid of those means millions of Americans who rely on these things will no longer be able to get their accommodations to the same level they do. Organization of public schools will be a total mess. And then combine that with the issue of student loans, which again are also operated by the Department of Education. If they do manage to get the Department of Education out of the way, it's just going to hurt a lot of people. As to the war in Ukraine, I sincerely doubt we're going to see a peace under Trump. We might get an attempted temporary negotiation that puts Ukraine in a bad position, but I expect that Europe will increasingly militarize, especially smaller countries near Russia, who have now seen that there is nothing holding Russia back, thanks to the withdrawal of support by Donald Trump. This is just I don't expect this to be effective, and I agree with Darby that Democrats are probably going to take control of at least one of the House, either the House or the Senate.
All right, Darby, you want to respond?
Yeah, so a little follow up to the fact that you mentioned some of these issues with getting rid of the Department of Education at the federal level. If you look at the U.S. Constitution, there is not a federal Department of Education from the beginning. And I think from the very beginning of the Department of Education and introduction of FAFSA, the student loans that you discussed, I think that did more of a disservice. Even though, I received loans from the federal government, I have received the accommodations for school, but that was more through the Iowa law, to my knowledge, and the Iowa vocational rehabilitation services that I got throughout high school. I don't think that what the federal government does, that a state can gain those resources, pass those laws. But at the same time, FAFSA actually rose the price of institutions, rose the price of tuition. And so I think getting rid of that federal program will actually decrease the cost of education in America.
So I have two questions to that. First of all, do you consider that the privatization of private loans and the Sally Mae program contributed to the rise of student loans?
I mean, I have no doubt that also had part of it. But at the same time, when the federal government gets involved and allows you to take out loans on behalf of yourself and the federal government and have to pay back those loans to the federal government, I think that also gives public institutions and the private to raise the cost.
Sure, but I also think the other side of that is that you also have access to for people who otherwise wouldn't have the means to go to college, and in this increasingly service-based economy and an increasingly complicated economy, don't you think that having more people with degrees is a good thing?
I do. I do think that getting a degree is a good thing. I don't think it's for everybody, but I do think it is being affordable is a priority, and I think it's a great priority. But at the same time, anytime that the federal government gives the institutions an excuse, a reason to raise those prices, they're going to take it. For example, institutions like Loras, Clark, UD, Iowa, Illinois, all those public and private institutions, before FAFSA, they might have been
Okay,
only.
Darby, your time is up.
So I guess that this is where I both agree and disagree. For example, Illinois, I don't know how familiar you are with Illinois education policy, Darby. I'm not as familiar with Iowa's state policy since I haven't lived there in a very long time. But Illinois funds most of its education budget through property taxes. And that's part of the reason property taxes in the state of Illinois are so high. So if we were to get rid of the Department of Education and much of the funding that comes with it for public schools, the end result would actually be a harsher burden on taxpayers on property, and would also likely lead to higher taxes across the board for other states as well. So
Okay,
again,
Connor,
like
your
removing
time is
the
up.
so
I don't think that it's I have a problem with Illinois politics to begin with their high stakes taxes and across the board. But as far as keeping it to education, I think that goes more so with the state governments. I think finding cuts where they need to find cuts. Iowa is kind of mirroring the Doge. And hopefully that's another topic for another question though. I yield back.
yeah, I look at this as education as an investment in the American people in general, not just state authorities. Your trust of state governments is far beyond mine. I think if there's an issue with the constitutionality, then amend the Constitution to give Congress the power to create a Department of Education and protect it. Making sure education isn't simply a matter of creating jobs. It's also about creating good, educated citizens to be able to be informed, effective, and respond to the concerns of the public. And that is a national concern through and through.
Here's a question to kind of help stimulate this conversation further. I guess I'll ask this to you, Connor. Even if all the data indicated that federal education was a boon to the economy, do you think that from a moral perspective it would still be worthwhile, or would the economic factor like undermine keeping it?
Do you mean like a boon as in like it more expensive?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think the moral when it comes to making sure you have an informed citizenry in a democratic republic or representative democracy, whichever term you want to use, uh, that's central. I mean, you cannot consent to your government if you don't know what your government is doing or how that government works. So having an informed citizenry that is civically minded, aware, and educated is critical. I think it's just a matter of the basic moral reality of modern democratic states. You need an educated citizenry.
And for you, Darby, what do you think? Do you think that what's more important, like the education or the job creation?
I would say job creation, and here's why. I think that when you look at the education in America as a whole, and one of the reasons I think it does need to return to the states is because we have so many people that are opting now for those non-college degree positions, or the ones that you can start out as a college student with a GED or a GED, and the corporation will actually assist you with the college degree to help you achieve the promotions within the company long term, if you agree to stay there long term as well. And so my understanding is that if you take the Department of Education and return it to the states, you can do more things with those resources that the federal government is not
Your
currently
time
doing.
is up.
So yeah, ultimately we're going to kind of go back and forth on this particular issue. But to the other point earlier about when it comes to the states, I am incredibly skeptical of state governments being the most rational, and when it comes to things that have national importance. But the other side of this is a lot of the state legislatures get to rewrite and control their own districts. So they have a vested interest in basically protecting themselves from the consequences of their policy decisions, even arguably more so than Congress. And so I worry that when it comes to how our states are enacting their legislation, especially as it relates to education policy, we won't see a reinvestment or reformation of education. We'll just see a degradation and a complete mess without support. And remember,
All right.
the
Your
Department of
time is
Education.
up.
Doesn't that speak more to how you should be reforming your state government instead of depending solely on the federal system and giving the power to the federal nationwide system? I want policies that work in my state for my state. I don't really care if I'm not living or working in Illinois what they decide to do with their education system, because to me, I think it matters about what works in the state's economy. Okay. And I don't understand why the federal government is given all this power.
So to answer your question, I think anybody would want to reform their state. But like I said earlier, when you have people in power that are able to insulate themselves from the consequences of their actions because of the excessive deference to state leaders that your position would allow, it makes it harder to create that very reform. This is part of the reason why people get so upset about gerrymandering in non-competitive states. It insulates the powerful. The other side of the thing is you should care about the education policy of other states because people don't just stay in their states. They travel, they interact, they make government decisions, they support politicians.
All
This
right.
is where
Your
it goes
time
back.
is up.
And I agree. I agree that people leave Illinois, leave California, they leave Idaho, they leave Iowa. I get that. But my understanding is that whether it's education or the economy or abortion or whatever issue we're talking about, why should the federal government get to dictate what each individual states decide? The Constitution allows the states to have their own rights unless it's specifically mentioned in the U.S. Constitution.
So, well, first of all, this Department of Education doesn't dictate curriculum. It's more of a support mechanism, the only thing it really can do, especially as it relates to what I focus on, is disability rights. Like I mentioned earlier, and I noticed that you didn't address this, is how they make sure accommodations for disabled students are ensured nationwide. That meaning that every American disabled student has the same rights, such as access to an individual education plan through K through 12 education. So when it comes to the Department of Education, they're not dictating curriculum; they're dictating the rights of the students.
I guess
And
to play devil's advocate, Connor, isn't it possible for us to enforce those rights for people that are disabled without the Department of Education still existing?
Theoretically, but I am very skeptical. As I said before, it's the insulation of power by state governments. I mean, if you look at people who go into the state legislature, there's a lot of really good people, there's a lot of really bad people, but a lot of the times people don't pay attention. And also, a lot of them are in districts that are gerrymandered to benefit them heavily. And because of the failure of the Supreme Court to do anything about gerrymandering, it's made those state governments worse. So again, like if you have state governments that are able to insulate themselves, they're not going to really reform anything. They're not going to necessarily defend the rights of disabled people because they don't have to, because they won't lose their seats.
Your time is up.
You say that they wouldn't have to, or you don't, they may not feel they have to without the Department of Education. But I would argue that the Americans with Disability Act and its amendments, they do dictate that all students need accommodations in their job or in their educational work place of where they go to school and where they work. So I would argue that that's already written law, and we don't need a department telling us what to do.
But the department is the one that makes that, it puts that into practice. That they're the ones charged with the individual to ensure those accommodations exist. Which is this is the thing. You can write a law that says this is what we're going to do, but if you don't have a mechanism of enforcement or organization of your efforts, it's effectively just a piece of paper and it's useless. And that's where we need a Department of Education. And as I said before, like I know you have an issue with it on a constitutional level. I'm just going to say amend the Constitution. There's a lot of powers that a modern nation state needs, which means to protect its citizens, especially from regional authorities.
So if that's the path you want to take of amending the Constitution, I would be in favor of calling the Convention of States and having that being a talking point, but I think it's going to fall flat on its face.
All right.
Do you want to move on to the next question now?
Yes,
I think so.
All right. So starting with you, Connor. Now with Trump in office again, where do you see the Democratic Party going from here?
Oh boy, this is going to be a mess. Yeah, I think Darby and I will agree on this point that the Democratic Party's current leadership is inadequate, like heavily. When it comes to the Democratic Party, it's kind of hard to see. I was very disappointed that the Democrats just basically ignored a younger, more popular Democratic politician in AOC and instead gave it to a much older senior leader who didn't really have the same level of name recognition. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think he also had cancer. So they're not looking for longevity. Democrats need to really change their approach. They need to start investing in younger candidates. They need new name recognition, new people who know how to use social media and approach people where they are. They need to start talking about overturning Citizens United. They need to start talking about getting money out of politics, increasing access to healthcare and education and all of those things. And until Democrats do that, they're not going to be anywhere near the effective party that they should have been 4 years ago.
I'm not necessarily familiar with the situation of AOC being outvoted by a position for the House leadership. So you know more about that, Connor. But I would just say that you got to look past the progressive policies that lost the 2024 election, and you got to find those candidates that are willing to meet in the middle and work with Republicans. And so that's why I see that as the issue of the Democratic Party.
So I gotta say this though, when it comes to like you've been talking about the media a lot in our previous part of this discussion, but don't you think that the media's failure to acknowledge some of the progressive accomplishments when it comes to student loans, to negotiating drug prices, all of those things that had the Biden administration more effectively communicated, they probably would have been more popular on. Don't you think that's a contributing factor to why the Democratic Party suffered in the last election, more so than like appealing to the center?
Excuse me. I think you specifically mentioned the fact of student loan forgiveness or some other, I'll let you name some other progressive policies that you think the media could have done a better job of. But I just think that the Republicans had a solid argument of why student loans forgiveness was a bad idea. Would I have taken advantage of it had it been a thing? Absolutely. But at the same time, you got to use your resources, right? But at the same time, I also see the argument within the Republican Party that if I didn't take out the loan, it's not my responsibility to pay back.
All right, your turn.
Yeah, I'll just want him to be able to hear that because he's coughing. So I
Sorry.
think yeah, it's one of those days. It's all right. So I think the fundamental problem here is the way Darby approaches this is he seems to think that the Joe Manchin Democrats are the way. Well, Joe Manchin's gone. He's gone. He's going to get his lobbying job, and the only real reason he was "quote unquote" in the center was because he was getting money from the oil and gas industry as part of his fundraiser, and his state started going even more red. So that position is for a Democrat is fundamentally just is on a foundation of sand. If you want to win elections, yes, you do have to appeal to independents. Yes, you do have to appeal to those people, but you also have to appeal to your base with actually solid progressive politics and the things that they approve of.
All right, your
If you
time is
just
up.
So you argue that he was you argue that Joe Manchin was more interested in the oil industry and being in a primary red state. Well, then what are some other policies besides ones that Joe Manchin may have gotten behind that you feel the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is the future?
So I think the Chips and Science Act was an incredibly effective approach because we were actively investing in new technology to keep us competitive with China. And I think in that case, there is an argument for both progressive economics in that it was investing in the public sector, investing in new sciences and deals through government spending. But it also was appealing to Republicans because it was able to say, hey, we're going to invest in America's future and we're going to make sure we don't fall behind with China. And the Democrats under Joe Biden got that through. So again, like it wasn't like the Democratic Party is without success. They're not very good at communicating it, and they keep going with a lot of the senior people rather than newer blood that can actually make their message appealing.
All right, your time is up.
So wasn't that a bipartisan bill, though, that both sides were able to work together? That wasn't necessarily a progressive win, other than there was progressives at the negotiating table and Biden signed it, correct?
Oh yeah, I mean that's how government works. It is still a progressive agenda in that it was government involvement in the economy, government involvement in investing in the public sector and in science. And I never said that it was solely progressive. I said that it was a progressive thing that also could appeal to Republicans. There is a center that you have to appeal to, and I know you were coughing a little bit earlier, but you do have to appeal to independents. But in order to really benefit from anything, you also have to appeal to your base in elections, and that means you're going to have some progressive stuff involved there.
Okay.
All right. So moving on, for Darby, there were frequent points throughout your video where you invoked your Catholic faith. So I was wondering, how does your Catholic faith inform your political viewpoints? And after you're done answering that, Darby, I'm curious for kind of like, how do you feel about that interpretation?
So I look at what the Catholic Church stands for and what the Catholic Church offers as a important issue, right? Or a extension. I don't know how to articulate it, but I'll just say important main issue that primary issues would be the word I'm looking for. So the Catholic Church has primary issues. One's being abortion, others being open doors. I know the Democratic Party and the Republican Party differ on the issue of immigration, and I will have to say that I do not necessarily believe in the way the mass deportation is being handled by the Trump administration. However, I'm not fully against some sort of deportation for those that come into the which I know that goes against the Catholic Church, but I think there is a way to do it with human dignity. And because I'm running out of time, I'll let Connor respond to that first part, and then I'll continue with my answer as a response.
So yeah, I think that people can evaluate and Darby and I are both Catholics. We were actually both interviewed by the National Catholic Reporter while we were roommates, and that was actually a very nice experience for both of us. The issue I think is when we look at the expression of government, there is a risk of putting dogma onto the government at the expense of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. And this is especially frustrating for me because when I was at Loras and when Darby and I were both at Loras, I studied the role of anti-Catholicism in during the pre-Civil War era and in the Reconstruction era. And for example, in 1844, there were nativist riots because the Catholic denizens did not want to have to be reliant on a Protestant version of the Bible, and it resulted in the destruction of Catholic churches. So for me, I look at it as I want people to be able to express their faith, but they also should be distrustful of government getting involved in religious affairs or attempting to enforce religious beliefs on people, or promoting them, because the soul is too important to trust to the hands of the government.
So I agree that I don't necessarily believe that we need to push beliefs on other people. However, I do believe that a lot of what the Catholic Church stands for is a moral issue, which I believe that the American American Republic, the American Republic is founded upon Judeo-Christian values. And so those things that I believe strongly in come from my faith, and they're not necessarily pressing that upon the U.S. government, because the U.S. government was founded on Christian values. So when we see the U.S. government going away from those values, as in the Democratic progressive wing, that's what disturbs me.
So there's two things there. I could, first of all, I think when it comes to some of the main founding fathers like James Madison, he explicitly said that the role of government is better off when it is separate from religion. So for many of the founders, that they would disagree with you. Some of the other ones would not. But like that was a more southern wing of the founders. As to your point about Christian values, I would point out that Catholicism was not central at that time to the founders. In fact, most of them were Protestant. So if we're arguing that Christian values are, the nation is founded on Christian values, no, it would be specifically Protestant values, and both of our values would not apply.
Your time is up.
I think it's unfair to our Protestant brothers and sisters to kind of throw them under the rug there. I think that we all can agree that majority of our morals, Protestant or Catholic, are very similar.
I mean, when it comes to the social safety net and the support for government support for people, the Catholic Church is a lot stronger on that than most Protestant wings. And I'm not trying to throw Protestants under the bus here, but what I am trying to point out is that when we talk about our faith, we have to be wary of how we appeal to historical myths while ignoring the differences of their understanding of their faith and our understanding of their faith, both as the historical actors, as the founders are, and as we are as members of a separate faith. There was only one Catholic founding father, and he was from South Carolina. The rest were all either Protestants or deists or atheists. So it's a little more complicated than you're making it out to be.
Well, I'm not going to get into a Catholic argument defense in this political debate, so that might be another day, Connor, for you. But so with that, I'll yield back.
I guess to get a bit spicy here.
Oh boy, here we go. Oh boy.
So when it comes specifically to the topic of abortion,
I knew this was coming.
How does your Catholic faith inform your stance on that? Starting with Darby, I'll give you each 2 minutes to start this one.
Yeah. So the Catholic Church is very, very strongly against abortion, and you have bishops from both sides that have stood their ground here. You've had conservative and more progressive, liberal leaning politically, popes that have stood their ground throughout the 2,000-year history of the church, that abortion is against the Catholic Church teaching and has no place in society. And so what I would argue is that there should be no considered quote unquote rights to an abortion, because abortion is death. And so I do not condone death in any regards, just like I will break party lines when it comes to the death penalty. I've stood my ground from the moment of the beginning. I do not believe in death.
So I just have one question. What about in the case of rape, or in the case of death, the health of the mother?
How long do I have to is that 30 seconds? Is that a response?
Yeah, we're each on 30 seconds at this point now.
Okay. So the question was, what about rape and incest? I would go hard.
And the death of the mother.
And the death of the, I would go hard against. So I think there's a common misconception. I'll start with the life of the mother, because there's a common misconception that an ectopic pregnancy where it's stuck in the fallopian tube, that is considered an abortion. And medically, yes, it is called a medical abortion. But that is, as a pro-life American, I think that the medical industry needs to recode their terminations of pregnancies, because if removing a child from the fallopian tube is the only path to safety of the parent, and the intent is not to kill the child. The intent is to save.
So I guess this is kind of an issue of categorization. But the thing is, I'm perfectly aware that my position is not going to fit perfectly with the Catholic Church's, period. However, I'm also aware that when it comes to making effective policy and being able to actively address the issue of abortion, the proposals by the pro-life side do not actively reduce abortion rates. Consistently, study after study has actually shown that it increases maternal mortality. It is a consistent problem. And if you want to actually stop abortion, you have to address the root causes of it. And you also have to consider that many of the people who are making these laws are men who have no idea what they're doing or how this process works.
All right, your time is up.
So I know eventually we'll get to rape and incest but I'll quickly hint at my answer to that, and then return to the, if given time, return to your point there. So my argument against allowing abortion in the cases of rape and incest, those are horrible things to happen to a mother, right? Horrible instances where a woman, a young woman, a girl was wholeheartedly, her dignity was stolen from her. But the fact that life came out of that, and that child is another human being, does that person have does he or she, the child, deserve to die for the crime of the child's biological father?
Well, first of all, I think the issue there is you're basically saying, hey, I know you lost your agency here to a predator, but now the state's going to take your agency again. And not only that, but we're going to settle you with the long-term medical consequences of a pregnancy, and could actually adversely reduce your life expectancy depending upon the health of the person, especially if God forbid it's a child that was raped. So again, like that, there's issues like that where I think the question of the supposed rights of the child here ignores just how traumatic what you are proposing is to the mother. It's arguably a form of torture by making them go through this process and have absolutely no consideration to the impact on that person. I mean, seriously, like, yeah.
Do you know the fact that the brain health, mental health, however you want to categorize that, because I know it's kind of brain health is the current medical term, but do you know how harmful that is to their mental health of the mother long-term, 15, 16, 17, 18 years, when she has more children, and then eventually has to explain to her kids that she was raped as a child and they bore a child, and now the child's dead, and they're wondering about their sibling, and the mother's wondering what if I would have chosen life for my child?
Do you consider that maybe, so first of all, I think you'd have to provide actual data to show that that's a common occurrence, or that it is a significant occurrence, that is the serious issue. And I don't have the data right in front of me to address a hypothetical without information. But I will also say, if you make a woman go through basically having her rapist baby, that also can create a room for abuse and other psychological problems. So again, we could create these hypotheticals here without data that I don't think either of us has, and that's going to cause a lot of problems.
All right.
I would encourage you to silentnomore.com does a lot of these studies about regretting abortions later in life. They've spoken at the Supreme Court at the National March for Life. There's various attempted abortion victims that have spoken out against abortion because their mother was raped, and the mother chose life, and they are forever grateful that their mother did not abort them, because they could have easily been aborted because their mother was raped.
All right.
To play devil's advocate again, I'm not going to speak to the truth value of the studies that you're referring to, but hypothetically, if it was the opposite, that the mental well-being of women was actually higher after having an abortion, would that impact your position at all, or would it remain the same?
I think I would definitely I would be academically dishonest if I did not look at that study and review it and try to understand what the study is trying to show and where our viewpoints from the Catholic Church's standpoint, from the pro-life standpoint, from the pro-choice standpoint. I would definitely have to be open to reviewing that before I form an argument in that regard.
All right. Would you want to move on to the final question, or do you want to respond to that, Connor?
I mean, but I think both of us don't have data up in front of us, so I think that's kind of, we're both going to go back with hypotheticals, and that's just going to cause problems for both of us. I think it's important to stick with data as much as humanly possible.
Fair enough. All right, so the final question is starting with you, Connor. Politically, what are the two things that you think that you both agree on the most, and why do you agree on them?
Oh, this is actually going to be hard because it's been a while since we've had like a serious political debate. The old LMAC gang used to have to deal with us after a few drinks and just start going on rants together. Yeah, I think for me, I think for one, both of us agree that Ukraine should have peace. It has a right to exist. I don't think Darby and I would argue that Israel should be obliterated or anything. So on the foreign policy front, I think we both agree that these two countries have a right to exist, and we ultimately want to see peace with all the people involved. So there's a little bit of an agreement there. The other side of things is I think when it comes to disability rights, the government, whether it's the state or the federal, has a role in protecting the rights of disabled citizens. Darby and I were both very firm advocates on that. We disagree about how to go about it, but I think we both agree that the government's role is to provide and to protect its citizens from adverse harm.
All right.
Yeah, so I would agree. Those are two very similar topics that we would agree on. It's just how to get there would be very, very different. And another thing that I think we both can agree on, and we're very thankful, is the fact that Matt Gaetz did not become the Attorney General. So I'm very grateful for that. And
Yes.
I think me and Connor have always agreed that he's a sleazeball that should never have touched the Justice Department. And the fact that there's some media that are trying to portray that he might be a candidate for the Supreme Court, I don't buy into that. I hope not. And I think Connor can agree on that as well. Another thing that I think Connor may or may not agree, but I'd like to think that he would agree on, is the new the Epstein files that just came out was a horrible way of bringing them forth and for transparency purposes. When you know what's bad when MAGA Republicans come out and say that Pam Bondi should resign because of that transparent act.
Yeah, I think we both agree that that's on both of those fronts. And I think we'd even agree further that Governor Cuomo has former Governor Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, has absolutely no reason to be running for mayor of New York City, which is why I'm going to be making a video about that once we're done here. But yeah, no, it's nice to see that at the very least when it comes to some of these issues, there is some overlap and agreement on the basics here. I think after a certain point, you have to get back to basics for a functioning government and a functioning society to maintain itself.
Right. And you had brought up the mayor's race. I think that what happened with the Justice Department, I think it was the acting at the time. It wasn't Pam Bondi yet, but the acting Attorney General basically said, yeah, we agree you have corruption charges. The evidence is there for Eric Adams, but he's going to come work for Trump. Just drop the charges. But we can bring the charges back down the road. I think that opens the door for corruption into the Trump administration that I hope that those charges can stick and that somehow they're overturned and that Eric Adams doesn't step foot in the Trump administration.
All right.
Well, I'm glad to see that in spite of everything, we can still find a little bit of middle ground.
Yes.
But anyway,
absolutely.
though, so to wrap things up, now it's time for our 1-minute closing statements. So who wants to go first? I'm not going to pick this one.
So Darby, since you went first, should I go?
I agree. Yep.
Okay, so I think this conversation's been, first of all, I'm very thankful to you, Nate, for moderating this. I know Darby and I have had our many disagreements, and sometimes we can get very passionate. So it's good that we were able to just get into the weeds of this a little more with more clarity. But I think anytime when we talk about elections in retrospect, we have to be aware of two things. Elections, like many things in politics, are multi-causal and multi-contextual. There are multiple things that are at play all at once, and being able to understand them in the context in which they're understood is critical. The other thing is that there are a lot of partisan voices out there who are more interested in portraying candidates as either terrible or perfect, and we need to rise above that. We need to look at things from an analytical political science lens, and I think I've done that throughout this debate and through my responses and interviews.
I think we have to look at the government as a whole, and I think we need to get back to the bipartisanship. And I would even go a step further. I think we need to get out of partisan politics altogether. I think we need to open the door for a third class or a third party to kind of get into politics, which is why I am a firm believer in what the Forward Party is trying to do. That's the party that Andrew Yang called forth a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat. And came together and tried to form a grassroots movement. And that's kind of where I find myself. And so that's where I'm able to come to an agreement with Connor on issues of like foreign affairs and the two-part state solution and the things that we mentioned before of the Attorney General scandal, the Eric Adams scandal. I think so. Finding that common ground is huge in the political sector. And so I would argue that we need to allow more of these minority voices to come forward while I still remain a member of the Republican Party, more so the moderate wing rather than the MAGA wing. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you for your time, Nate.
All right. So Darby, Connor, thank you for both engaging in this debate today. I'm glad that it was a fruitful conversation. So I guess with all that, this is over.
Thank you.